I didn't see this coming so soon into the season. We barely even started. Toto's letting his boys cook instead of just blindly chasing Max Verstappen. But does this new plan of Toto's mean that Max Verstappen is no longer compatible with F1? Well, I mean, not that he cares, of course. You might be yelling, "Hold on, Law, Toto hasn't given up on Max at all. He's chased him since he slipped away a decade ago. What stopped him now?" I hear you, I get it. You do have a fairly valid point, since both George Russell and Kimi Antonelli do not have a contract that extends beyond this season. That ambiguity does bring up the question of Max Verstappen still, despite the fact that the team principal has said on the record that Verstappen is no longer on his radar. In short, he basically told the world, "I already have a Max at home, and he speaks Italian." And also, like Verstappen, Antonelli, he's a little meme lord, isn't he?
Fernando.
But back to business. I've got receipts on why Toto might genuinely be done with Max once and for all. Granted, Toto did hold discussions with the Dutchman's management team recently, right at the height of Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari and that drama, but when asked about the current status of that particular chatter, Wolff confirmed that, as of now, the matter has been shelved. Or maybe, or in my honest opinion, I think it's now been scrapped altogether, because it's no longer part of his plan for Mercedes in the long term. But enough of my yapping on. Here's exactly what Toto said on the matter. Ahem. By the way, I won't do the accent for your own sake. I think we said it pretty clearly last year, and Max said the same. We need to concentrate on our driver lineup. We need to do the best that we can. I don't flirt outside if I'm in a good relationship, and that is true for this year too. At the moment, that is not on any, let's say, radar. I don't like to shift my concentration away from George and Kimi. We have had a chat a few weeks ago about what the right timing would be to liaise. I'm someone who sticks to what he says, and these two are the combination that I want to go forward with Mercedes. I have no other reasons to doubt that. We're going to find some time, I guess before the summer. I need to be careful what I say to you because you will, every month probably, ask when have those discussions happened. Toto. But we will do that in a timely manner, without disrupting the season. Oh, it's like Toto's directly telling the media, "I'm going to nip it in the bud before you start doing anything." Now, if that were the case, Max basically told Wolff to focus on the guys he's already got, then that's a pretty big thing for Max to say or do. That or Verstappen would rather not work with either George Russell or Kimi Antonelli for any undisclosed reason that myself as a ladder man or you ladder fans are not aware of at this time. But that does raise a really good thought process which I shall elaborate on later. But I think honestly, what Toto is saying right now is rather encouraging for anybody who believes in the likes of Russell and Antonelli. In any case, the matter of contracts for both men was addressed in Toto's response to the media, that perhaps before the Hungarian Grand Prix, where Mercedes retained their current pairing with a joint contract extension. Maybe even sooner than that should the W16 turn out to be a pretty good car, and reflects the uptick in performance we've seen in pre-season testing, where, quite frankly, it was the most relaxed I'd ever seen George Russell in a Mercedes car that wasn't secured 2020, and Kimi Antonelli, well, considering that he's a rookie, he just got on with the job. He just looked so natural in that car, like he'd been doing this for years. But you know what? This whole cooling down on Max Verstappen and this being officially confirmed by Wolff, even though some people may think that he will eventually completely contradict himself in the fullness of time, should Max become more available, but I do think it is a slight evolution on the ethos at Mercedes, and maybe them genuinely wanting to turn a new page in the book that they are making post-Lewis Hamilton. Something different to the model that we see at Red Bull, for example, where one driver rules all. But unlike McLaren's team-first approach with the now notorious Papaya Rules moniker, another interview Wolff partook in really got me intrigued, so I shall share that with you right now because this might go some ways to explain exactly what is going on and what Toto plans to do with the drivers he already has, and why Max may not come a-knocking anytime soon, or for anyone else in the front-running pack. Ahem. For Kimi, it's about the time to develop, to learn the tracks, to be on top for next year, the regulation change. That means great results, and that means moments where it's going to be more difficult. I said to George, we don't expect you to be just crushing Kimi all the time. We wouldn't have hired Kimi if we thought that would be the case. So, I believe in terms of speed, Kimi is going to be right up there with George. There's a lot to learn in terms of long running the tyres, and the development is going to be steep. We have a driver combination of one very young driver, 18 years old, and another young driver, 27 years old. And hopefully, they're going to push each other, and push each other strong. And George, oh, he's concurring with the boss. Him agreeing with Toto that Antonelli could be right up there in terms of pace. But the differentiator would be the simple fact that, well, Russell's more experienced than the young Italian where it counts. Kimi and George might get on famously, and they might just want to continue with that trend, especially if it's getting Constructors and Drivers' Championships again, like the good old days. Now, of course, one could argue that if Red Bull falters, Verstappen will become the hottest property on the grid, and Mercedes wouldn't hesitate to reconsider abandoning what they're planning on right now. After all, Wolff has always been pragmatic, and a proven champion is hard to ignore. But here's the counterpoint. Is Verstappen still as indispensable as he once was? And not to mention what we've seen from Mercedes in the last couple of seasons especially, where they've been basically, with something akin to the spanner of speculation, hammered over the head time and time again on social media regarding accusations of sabotage, favoritism, and all of that strife. Maybe that era of Mercedes is something that Toto just wants to put to the wayside. It was toxic, it was stifling, it was suffocating, and now they're onto something new where they have two drivers that are fully molded to the image that Mercedes wants. George and Kimi, they are perfect examples of the type of driver that Mercedes wants. Professionally pleasant, geeky, and also gutsy in the car where it matters. Also, it's become increasingly clear that success is not solely determined by raw speed and aggressive competitiveness anymore. Instead, long-term championship aspirations depend on the ability to build a harmonious, unified team, which McLaren will be more than happy to sing from the rooftops about since, well, they won the team title because of it. Whilst also not wanting to go into detail into how awkward a journey it was in 2024, with McLaren realising that they were at the front again, and then Lando sort of realising that maybe he had a shot at the World Championship, but then not really. It was a bit of a growing pains moment for that team last year, that was for sure. And something tells me that Mercedes might get it right more effectively, and less dramatically, and also without coming up with a name for it. This might be one reason why Mercedes is gradually moving away from the anything goes mentality that has characterized teams like Red Bull. The conversation today centers around whether a driver like Max Verstappen, renowned for his relentless, sometimes combative style, can continue to thrive in an environment in sport that increasingly values cohesion and mutual support. Put simply, I just think Max no longer fits the archetype that Mercedes is looking for in terms of a driver. That's okay, they don't have to sign Max Verstappen, they're not being forced to. But Max is unlikely to change, nor should he change. That's just who he is. And any team that may want to make use of his services simply has to accommodate that. He will not compromise. As a result, it means that Red Bull has moulded itself into the image that Max Verstappen best works with, in that he has been around that team for coming up to a decade now at this point. Red Bull is Max Verstappen, and Max Verstappen is Red Bull. It just clicks. Kind of like Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, since he was powered by Mercedes engines since he was 13. So seeing him at Ferrari, Lewis, it's still really weird to get used to, even though we've seen it for the last couple of months. But by contrast to Red Bull, Mercedes under Toto Wolff is now developing faster than ever an ethos where driver relationships are carefully managed, ensuring that both members of the pairing contribute to the collective goal without stepping on each other's toes, which admittedly was incredibly complex to navigate with such a figure as Lewis Hamilton knocking around, and the evolution of George Russell at the same time, rubbing the F1 legend up the wrong way on many occasions. Unlike the days of Valtteri Bottas, of course, who did toe the line for the sake of getting 10 victories to his name. He did have a good time, and Lewis had a good time with him as well, labelling the Finnish Australian as the best teammate he ever had because, well, he knew to stay in his lane and didn't get in the way. And with Toto shutting down the Verstappen rumours once and for all, or at least for the foreseeable future, hopefully this season, what we are seeing from him, what he wants from his team and drivers is clear. That he wants two fast races that come with no baggage, no drama at all. Because you got to admit, the drivers that he's got, they look pretty feisty. Russell, consistent, disciplined. Antonelli, he's really quick and rapid and eager to learn. Such a really keen little bunny, isn't he? They were built to push each other, not to clash with one another. It's balance over chaos. The team doesn't want Russell to put the new guy in his place, and nor does Russell want to do the same. And this approach might end up paying dividends in the Constructors' Championship should the W16 turn out to be the team's strongest ground effect era machine. Now, I'm not saying Mercedes is going to win the Constructors' Championship or anything. Ferrari and McLaren are simply too good. But I think Mercedes would be very happy with securing maybe third place in the Constructors' Championship and really giving Red Bull a run for its money and pushing them to be the bottom of the front-running pack. I think Toto will take great pride in that, knowing that they got some closure. Thusly, I'm pretty confident that whatever Toto's planning with George and Kimi, that it will work. It'll be more authentic, genuine, easier to manage than what's going on over at McLaren with the papaya rules thing. And you might be thinking, Law, you're really dunking on McLaren recently, aren't you? It's because I care. I want McLaren to thrive. I don't want them to be forcing team unity this strictly and artificially and just being like, be nice or else! Because when you compare the team order strategies with Mercedes and McLaren, the former's new approach appears to be built for long-term stability, prioritising internal harmony over individual dominance. McLaren, meanwhile, enforcing its papaya rules, and according to the team principle, if you can't follow it, then you don't belong with the team. Yeah, there's a really strong sense of finality, isn't there? Yeah, it works for now, but if you push it too hard into the faces of both Norris and Piastri, it could backfire in a big way. This forced harmony could breed friction instead of that desired unity, an approach that might explain why Verstappen may no longer be in their plans, because the implications for Verstappen are becoming clearer by the day when viewed through this lens. In the current environment, teams like Mercedes, they may be looking for drivers who not only possess world-class talent, but also seamlessly integrate into a mindset where, as Toto would put it, every dream needs a team. Verstappen's aggressive style, whilst it really thrives on individual brilliance and has resulted in a hugely glowing record within Formula 1, he's certainly justifying his place as a legend of the sport. It may no longer gel well with teams who are looking to build upon long-term missions of theirs that have been brewing in the background for years, especially in the case of Mercedes. This might mean that Verstappen, even though he's quick and any team would want to have a world champion on their books, that him being slotted in immediately may not be suitable. It may not be appropriate. It may make him undesirable. So Verstappen going to Mercedes, I really don't see that happening anymore, because Mercedes right now, they are laser focused to get themselves back to where they were prior to 2021, and also in a collective manner. I read their book, Life in the Fast Lane, and even though it was a little bit propagandary to my taste, I did recognise the fact that they all want to try and get back to where they were as one unit. Max, just no, it doesn't work. It's not that Verstappen is without merit. In fact, his record, drive, commercial appeal, they make him one of the most sought-after talents in the sport. However, his trademark personality, which forged his legendary status in the first place, might limit his options in a future where teams are less willing to tolerate internal strife that we've seen at Red Bull for the sake of a couple of championships. Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, you've only got to look at them and what they're planning and what they've got cooking with their own lineups. Lewis and Charles, they're contracted through 2027 at least. Piastri getting his contract extension recently. Norris, that's looking toward the end part of this decade. Russell and Antonelli, a contract extension for them is pretty imminent based on what Toto said. There may not be any room at the inn for Verstappen anymore with these three teams. He might be stuck with Red Bull, seemingly, for the rest of his tenure. That 2028 deal might run out, even if Red Bull fall off. Especially considering how expensive he has become now. What does Max do? Does he put up with his current team, who are still attempting to get on top of their correlation issues and the data collected from preseason testing? Well, for now, Verstappen seems content to wait and see, acknowledging that Red Bull are not the quickest at the moment, but remaining optimistic all the same that things could change quickly. And maybe they will. But what if they don't? Supposing 2025 turns out to be a season where the RB21, the car that Max has right now, is not a compelling challenger in order to help him defend his world title, and that means a fifth championship is not on the cards for this year. And then going into 2026, will they get the regulations right? If they don't, and they fall off even more than they already are, then who's to say whether or not Verstappen may just quit for another team spontaneously or quit the sport altogether? It's that level of unpredictability which is making Max's situation right now all the more curious and intriguing and fascinating. And I know you're probably going to not like me for bringing this up again, but it really does bring back into the limelight the whole Aston Martin chestnut. Yeah, sorry. But it may be more relevant than ever, because on paper, Aston Martin's win at any cost approach under Lawrence Stroll could be a natural fit for Verstappen. They're aggressive, high risk, investing big in every area, not just the drivers, because look at the brain trust that they've acquired, including Max Verstappen favourite Adrian Newey. But here's the issue that I have in my mind, which may make Aston Martin untenable, at least in its current guise. Stability. Because even though I am fully aware that Aston Martin Lagonda and Aston Martin Grand Prix Limited are two different entities, they are somewhat attached by the fact that Papa Stroll manages both entities. Aston Martin Lagonda are going through a really rough patch financially. The road car company is losing money thick and fast, and I've heard reports that they may be approaching bankruptcy in the not too distant future. They might have to, in a drastic manner, sell the rights to their Formula One team to try and make ends meet. So don't be surprised in the next couple of years that we might see a change of ownership where Aston Martin Formula One teams become Aramco Honda or something. But if Red Bull's power unit project with Ford flops, Verstappen might have no choice but to jump ship or jump out of F1. But where would he go if Aston Martin proves to be a little shaky? His price tag is sky high. Teams are now laser focused on long-term stability with their own current lineup. As great as Max is, he might not fit into any of their long-term plans now that Toto has poured water on him joining them. So through no fault of his own, Max Verstappen might find himself out of a job if he chooses to just completely cut ties with Red Bull and end it there and then. But would he do something so drastic and so risky? The rhetoric of what we're seeing right now, where he's being relatively patient and pragmatic and realistic with their lot at the moment, is a real change of mood from what we saw maybe just 6 to 9 months ago. The Hungarian Grand Prix, that was the lowest ever Verstappen and Red Bull relations, that he was getting frustrated, sick and tired of being ignored. A switch has been flipped, where Verstappen has become a little bit more forgiving. Because Verstappen's fiercely independent style could be a double-edged sword. His ability to dominate on the track is unquestionable, but his history of clashing with teammates and his combative off-track persona means that only teams specifically designed to manage high-intensity independent drivers, or simply don't care about Verstappen's independent qualities, could accommodate him without risking internal collapse. Especially if his father Jos is allowed to run riot around the garage and shout at any given moment. But in my honest opinion, going back to the whole Mercedes-McLaren comparison, I'm really pleased with what Mercedes are doing at the moment. Even though I am a really long-term and devoted McLaren fan, I can certainly commend what Mercedes are doing right now with George and Kimi. Something to really remind people is that both George Russell and Kimi Antonelli are products of the Mercedes junior team. The dynamic we've seen with the drivers so far exemplifies this approach. Both drivers are expected to share the spotlight, learn from each other, and contribute to a collective team ethos that prioritizes consistent performance, internal harmony, over individual heroics. Which may go some way to explain, albeit reluctantly, why sometimes George wants to do some sort of heroic spontaneous action regarding a pit stop, and then the team looks at the data and then just goes, yeah, anyway, box. They like to believe computers rule the world. But what Mercedes count on is both George and Kimi to just roll with it, that they may be initially disappointed, and you do hear that a lot actually. And maybe this ethos might explain why Valtteri Bottas is back as well, as a reserve driver and mentor to Antonelli. He understands completely about having to put aside his personal ambitions for the sake of team cohesion, which worked incredibly well with Lewis Hamilton. The fact that he's willing to step back into teal and silver overalls despite having to play second fiddle to Lewis Hamilton, it could be a sign that whatever was forged with that team was worthwhile enough to have a second stint with them. And you get the feeling that Mercedes really want Valtteri back. They value him, because you gotta commend Toto Wolff, that he wanted to make sure that Bottas was not left out in the cold, and he then struck a deal with his good buddy Fred Vasseur at Alfa Romeo to put Valtteri in replace of Kimi Raikkonen, and then make sure he had a home. Even though that home turned into an absolute quagmire, and then Bottas admitted that staying with Sauber for 2024 was an absolute mistake, because all of his hoping and posturing that Audi would keep him just turned into nothing. So all this team unity, with Russell and Antonelli sticking to the script, and Bottas' experience maybe emphasizing this, it all stands in stark contrast to the potential disruption that may occur if a driver like Verstappen arrives in Brackley. What they've done right now, in response to letting Max Verstappen get away to Red Bull, has now borne fruit. Both Russell and Antonelli, they are in the hot seat, and we will now get to see what happens when you allow Mercedes to have their own junior program. whether or not it's more effective than Red Bull. And right now, this plan of allowing George and Kimi just to do their own thing for the betterment of the team overall, that there won't be any team orders, they'll be free to race, and in a more casual way than McLaren, I think it might end up being more successful, because both drivers get it. Because one important thing to remember with Norris and Piastri, Norris is a McLaren driver through and through, but Piastri is a relative outsider to McLaren, and is very keen to forge his own destiny with that team that put so much faith in him and wanted him oh so desperately in 2022 to replace Daniel Ricciardo. And not to mention the whole papaya rules thing, it's become a bit of a laughingstock. They would have done really well not putting a name to it and just saying team first. That was fair enough. Or they're free to race, but just have some common sense on the track, guys. Come on. And you've only got to look at McLaren's history to realise it's just inherent within that organisation that no matter what you do, if you have two high-class drivers who are potentially champions of the future, at a McLaren where they are the class of the field, you are going to get fireworks no matter who is in charge. That you're trying to artificially curtail their potential, that you have to ask them to think of the team, and that you have to stifle their potential and their prospects and scope for that race. It's compromised. And these two drivers are young, they're spirited, they're spunky. They do not want to bow down to anyone. Norris may get it more than Piastri, but it will cause fireworks, I guarantee you. I don't want this to happen, but it will. Because the fact they need to have such rules enforced means that there is a disconnect between the two drivers about what their goals are and how determined Piastri's manager Mark Webber is to ensure that the same thing doesn't happen to his boy that happened to him at Red Bull under Sebastian Vettel. How can Lando Norris compete with that? Well, I mean, winning the World Championship would be a start. And that's why I get a feeling that the papaya rules thing will just simply not work. It just seems artificial to me. Unlike what's going down at Brackley, that feels organic, genuine. That both Russell and Antonelli want the team to excel, to win, and they want to be a part of that journey. And you know what? I'm actually starting to get a sense that James Vowles took that ethos with him to Williams, because you've got to remember, James Vowles was a core member of the strategy team of Mercedes and a linchpin of the Mercedes Junior program, meaning that he was partially responsible in recruiting Russell and Antonelli in the first place. So we're seeing the exact same thing going down with Albon and Sainz. Them shirking off team politics, them not wanting anything to do with that, and wanting to try and bring a storied team such as Williams back to where it belongs, near the front. And I get the feeling that Mercedes will succeed, that they had good times with Lewis Hamilton, and they somehow made the whole team unity, collective success thing work alongside Lewis Hamilton's prestige and reputation and class and relative freedom. But I'm starting to see less and less instances where Lewis Hamilton can rock up to a Grand Prix in whatever clothes that he wants to wear, and he's more often than not seen in team gear. That restriction is a very interesting observation from the likes of Kim Millman. You watch that space. But right now, Mercedes is looking to change things up, and I do think it will work. Formula One is changing. The top teams don't just chase speed, they chase balance. Verstappen's talent, undeniable. But his fight everyone approach that is very old school, it might close more doors now than it used to open. Right now, Red Bull is still somewhere he calls home, and he seems to be a little bit more patient than he used to be. But considering that Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, they are forging long-term plans of their own that do not involve Verstappen, it does raise a question. Does Max Verstappen have a plan B, or is he stuck playing Red Bull's game forever? You know, hoping that they get the rules right in 2026 to then have another bout of long-term success? And speaking of long-term success, what Williams is building with Carlos Sainz could be their most exciting project in decades. No more paid drivers, just pure talent and a vision that's finally catching the attention of F1's top teams. To find out why I think what James Vowles is doing alongside Carlos and Alex would be something that would make the likes of its founder Frank Williams proud, watch this video next, straight after this one.